and welcome to Özgür News. My name is Amelie and I present our monthly English program presenting news and commentary from the Middle East. Under the slogan of In Midst of Reality, in the Center of Struggle, our topics today include the war in Palestine, an interview with the Prisoners Platform in Turkish prisons, an 8th of March segment after the repression of the state in Turkey, attacks by Turkish fascist TVs, local election developments in Turkey and Northern Kurdistan, the Van uprising following these elections, as well as the new developments in the northeastern Syria revolution of Rojava. Political prisoners in Turkey are continuing their hunger strikes, demanding freedom for the Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan. A solution to the Kurdish problem is also in their demands. They are in the hunger strike against the isolation detention. Prisoners have announced that they're intensifying their hunger strike and resistance following Turkey's local elections. We spoke to a member of the Prisoners Platform, TSP, on the conditions and developments in prisons.
As Turkish and Kurdish political prisoners' hunger strike continues, the pressure against prisoners increases day by day, and the Turkish state's isolation politics continue. How do you evaluate the intensification of the attacks against prisoners, especially against political prisoners during this period? When we look at the prison policy of the fascist Turkish state, and when we look at its history, prisons have always been the first places to be taken over. Especially political prisoners have always been the first targets. We also see this in the resistance against many attacks in prisons in the past after the 80s. Political prisoners have always answered them through struggle and resistance. Now, in recent years, the state has been making new types of prisons, calling them S-type, Y-type, and high prisons. It is an attack on these prisoners, pressuring them to surrender their strike by completely cutting them off from each other and cutting off their communication and connection to the outside. This attack has been carried out inside the prisons and outside by repressing the social struggle that is alive and growing because of the state's inability to govern. It fills people into prisons with arrests, and there, in fact, in recent periods, it has been carrying out a policy aimed not only at ideological political surrender or physical confinement within four walls, but also a policy aimed entirely at killing. The ill prisoners we have mentioned are left there to die by not being treated or released. Again, the isolation attack is a part of this. With the isolation attack, the 3-year-long absolute isolation of the Kurdish leader, which was developed in İmralı Island, is gradually being extended to other prisons. The hunger strikes are directed against this, both from the Turkish state's point of view, and when we look at all the states in the imperialist capitalist system, the presence of revolutionary prisoners and the struggle put forward by revolutionary prisoners is seen as affecting the social struggle outside. Therefore, there is a special attack against revolutionary and political prisoners in all states. In some states, such as Turkey, it has been taken to a much darker, much higher level. In this, of course, there is a close connection with the struggle waged by both the communist revolutionary movement in Turkey and Kurdistan and the Kurdish national liberation movement in Turkey and the imprisonment of thousands of people. Despite this, they cannot surrender, because there is a close connection. There are constant detentions. There's a series of operations that they carry out in the off-season with new excuses. These are attacks through which people are taken into custody and in which revolutionary socialists are particularly emphasized. With these, there is a big wave of attacks on people who send money to prisoners, who go to visit prisoners, who correspond with prisoners on the grounds that they are financing the organization, financing terrorism. They want to frighten and intimidate the society and to prevent solidarity with the prisoners.
Anti-fascists in Turkish cities have become victim to waves of repressions and house raids, detainments by the state. A representative of the Socialist Women's Council spoke to us.
Socialist Party of the Oppressed organized a press conference in Istanbul on the latest political attack on some of their leading members. We would like to point out that this operation, which was carried out before 8th March, is specially aimed towards the women's liberation movement. Leyla Can, member of the Socialist Women's Council's Executive Committee. She drew attention to the fact that the council's members were targeted in the political attack and said that the male-dominated state, unable to suppress the will of women, intensified its attacks due to this. Dem Party Member of Parliament Çiçek Otlu reacted to the political lynching attempt against her. Çiçek Otlu is the elected will of both women and our people. Leyla Can went on in saying, "We women will not give up the struggle. We will not back down." ESP Chairman Şahin Tümüklü stated that the government aims to weaken the revolutionary struggle with political attacks. "We call on our families, comrades and friends to stand in solidarity with political prisoners, revolutionary prisoners, anarchist prisoners, Kurdish prisoners most strongly in this sense. We call for unity around the prisons." Socialists were detained under torture, and among them was SKM General Spokesperson Tanya Kara. Socialist Miliha Kayacı, and an arrest warrant was issued for the two women afterwards. First of all, what does the fascist dictatorship aim at with this attack against women, against socialist women, both before the local elections and before 8th March? As we have all witnessed in recent years, one of the situations we have observed the most is one of the relevant calendar days for revolutionaries, especially 25th November and 8th March. When women take to the streets, unite their words with their actions, flow into the streets from everywhere and raise their demands for their lives and freedom. These protests really add energy to the organization of women, and the government knows this and follows them closely. It wants to carry out attacks on these calendar days. It wants to create a rupture within the revolutionary women's movement and to give a warning to general society. In addition, it is necessary to emphasize that the fascist AKP-MHP government's anti-women's policies have already existed, but there are various topics that it is trying to increase its fascist propaganda on in recent times. For example, it wants to enact policies on usurping women's rights to alimony, rewarding early marriage, creating various new regulations towards preserving the traditional family structure, and pushing women's lives towards insecurity by eviscerating this law on law number 6284. In line with these policies, since women are the segments of society who use the streets the most, they have to create a rupture here and suppress the voices of resistance on the street in order to realize these policies. There is also a misogynist policy in which it wants to create acceptable women, which it wants to imprison within the family, such as rewarding those who stay married for a certain number of years in order to prevent divorces. We can watch these government moves very closely. It specifically aims towards women who use their voice and take to the streets. We can clearly observe this from socialist women today. I would also like to emphasize that we all know that we have recently declared this to the public. In January, the Socialist Women's Councils held a congress, and very energetic and strong decisions and organizations came out of our congress. It has decided to use the streets to organize all women, young women, working women, to take to the streets with women to fight for our rights, to unite, and some concrete steps have started to be taken, which we can also observe to prevent us from doing so. Today, in fact, the issue that was shown as the reason for the detentions 2 days ago is one of the issues that is very important, especially for socialist women's councils. Solidarity with women's prisoners is indeed an area of struggle for us. To be in contact with women, to be in contact with our comrades, to meet the basic needs inside prisons, to send material solidarity, to send letters, cards, especially on 8th March, 25th November, to raise solidarity with politically imprisoned women, to make a public call for this. I think that this kind of work seriously disturbed the government and that we were taken into the scope of an attack from here. Along with our general spokesperson of SKM, our spokesperson of the United Labour Movement was also taken into custody and faced arrest. From here, we see very clearly that the steps we will take to carry the voice of working women to the streets, to unite the class struggle with the women's liberation struggle, to unite the working women's struggle, the concrete steps we take are faced with an attack by the government, as we have experienced again now. I would also like to make a call from here. I really think that today solidarity with revolutionary prisoners is in part of our honorable struggle outside. On the contrary, our letters with revolutionary prisoners are being criminalized by being presented as organizational documents. Our answer to this is, we have to unite and increase solidarity by taking much more serious steps to write more letters, to show more solidarity, to take much more serious steps in this regard to the public.
In news especially important to us, the studios of Media Haber and Sterk TV in Belgium were raided and computers and equipment were confiscated by Belgian police. These attacks coincided with attacks against journalists in Istanbul and Ankara at the same time.
The free press will not be silenced. The studios of Media Haber and Sterk TV were raided by Belgian police on 23rd April. Computers and equipment were seized by Belgian state police. They also cut the broadcasting wires to stop the colleagues from airing their programs. Both Medya Haber and Steg TV give a voice to the Kurdish people, including revolutionaries, academics, and artists. This raid by complicit police forces underlines the cooperation of the Belgian and Turkish states. Simultaneously, Özgür journalists were also raided and detained in Istanbul and Ankara. 9 of whom have been detained, 3 of them have now been demanded by a court of law to serve prison from time to their journalistic work. It was only a month earlier that following Kurdish New Year Newroz celebrations in Belgium, a Kurdish family was traveling home to the town of Huissen-Solda, Belgium, when they faced violent attacks by Turkish fascists. The fascist organization, called the Grey Wolves, gathered dozens of members outside of the house and threatened to burn the house and kill a number of Kurds in the area. Neither Belgium nor Germany, another close ally of the fascist Turkish state, criminalized Turkish fascist organizations. Kurdish cultural clubs, associations, organizations, and press often face repressions or criminalization across the European continent. Turkey's President Erdogan has since traveled to Baghdad to negotiate and make new plans with the Iraqi government in their joint war on the Kurdish peoples. In the statement given immediately after the raids, journalist and DEM party member Yazid Hussein Akyol said, "The operation exceeding the nation's borders directed its attacks against us in this raid. Now new NATO defensive resolutions have been made in Baghdad. A much larger operation awaits us. The free press will not be silenced."
The next segment includes developments following Turkey and Northern Kurdistan's local elections on the 31st of March.
Local elections took place in Turkey as well as the Northern Kurdistan region on 31st March. A total of 61 million eligible voters elected mayors and city district representatives. Amid a number of parties on the ballot, there were 3 major blocs in this year's election. Erdogan's Justice and Development Party, AKP, is currently governing in a coalition with the Fascist Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, the Republican People's Party, CHP, and Party for the People's Emancipation and Democracy, DEM. The DEM party emerged from the remaining forces of the heavily criminalized Democratic People's Party, HDP. It campaigned in both the metropolitan cities of Turkey and the Kurdish regions towards the east. The Democratic forces followed the tactic of rejecting the fascist AKP-MHP bloc as well as the bourgeois opposition CHP, and hence chose to pursue a third path with the DEM party. It aims to represent democracy, progress, gender equality, and thereby oppose the current structure supported by the other 2 blocs. Considering the DEM party experiencing great success in many municipalities and Kurdish regions, reactions by the Turkish government were quick to follow. Many polling stations were attacked by fascists, police, and even military forces. 1 man was killed and 11 other people were wounded, after a fight broke out between voters at a polling station in a village near the Kurdish city of Diyarbakir, or Ahmed as it is called in Kurdish. The AKP regime used many tools it has to resort it in past elections. It sent military and police forces to register to vote in regions where Democratic and Kurdish forces are favored for the election to turn out in their favor. Claims of alleged miscounts of ballots at polling stations or stolen or lost ballots are also a common headline of following the election. This time, however, mass protests erupted after the DEM party candidate of the city Van was wrongly removed from his newly elected position and replaced by one of AKP's own candidates. Abdullah Zaydan, the candidate elected by the people of the city, was violently to the ground by police at a rally held in protest of his removal as Van's mayor. Kurdish people in several regions took to the streets in protest against the democratic right to vote being taken away from them by the fascist state. They fought police forces and built barricades in their cities and towns. It has been years since the people of Northern Kurdistan took to the streets in such an uprising. Defending their peoples as well as their towns against fascist occupation, the resisting people in Van and across Northern Kurdistan may have raised the questions of how May Day will be approached in the region. The Confederation of Progressive Trade Unions of Turkey, short for DISC, intends to dam and consolidate the mass movement under the control of the bourgeois opposition's party, CHP. The workers' union is leaning on the developing political power and hegemony of the bourgeois left that emerged with the local elections. DISC's tactical attraction to celebrate May Day in Taksim, Istanbul, is a CHP policy. DISC's pointing to Taksim for Istanbul's May Day after the elections is actually to be read in reverse. The CHP disc hegemony established in the Maltepe areas is intended to be maintained in these new situations and conditions. It wants to organize the permitted, negotiated and controlled May Day protests through disc. The CHP is trying to move forward by taking the important opportunities it has achieved with its victory in the local elections. The CHP May Day's Taksim protest also aims to maintain the ideo-political hegemony it has established over a significant part of the working left during elections periods. The dynamics of people's class struggle on March 8th, the Nevros protests and Van resistance revealed and prepared the desire and determination to make a statement and celebrate May Day in Taksim Square, Istanbul. Today, the anger and discontent that has accumulated rights against the political Islamist fascist regime wants to flow with the May Day struggle. The reformist divisions within the working left ideopolitical independence from CHP hegemony in the May Day struggle is an issue that would follow its development on this year's May Day celebrations across Turkey and Northern Kurdistan.
Following the unlawful removal of Abdullah Zeydan, a Democratic Dem Party representative who was elected as mayor for the city of Van in Northern Kurdistan, the population took to the streets.
During the local elections held in Turkey and Kurdistan on March 31st, the Dem Party for People's Emancipation and Democracy, short for Dem Party, won many municipalities in northern Kurdistan by the will of the Kurdish people. After the important achievements of the Dem Party, AKP fascism tried to attack the will of the Kurdish people with a trustee coup. In the city of Van in Kurdistan, which the Dem Party won by a large margin, was attempted to be taken away from party representative through unlawful attempts. After the Turkish Ministry of Justice objected the candidacy of Abdullah Zeydan, the co-mayoral candidate of the Van municipality, the candidacy was invalidated. Dem Party co-chair Tuncer Bakaran said, "A political ambush is being set against the people of Van in the person of our co-mayor Abdullah Zeydan, whose candidacy was declared by the Supreme Electoral Council itself, after passing all the control measures of said council. 2 days before the elections and 5 minutes before the operating hours ended, the Ministry of Justice unlawfully revoked the rightful decision of our Van Metropolitan Municipality co-mayor Abdullah Zeydan. This is unlawful and a violation of democratic life. If the will of the people of Van is not protected today, the will of another city will be ignored tomorrow. For democracy, law and justice, everyone must defend the will of Van's people and stand by their will against this political conspiracy and ambush." Heavy clashes took place in Van and many other cities. People took to the streets and resisted in many cities of Kurdistan to claim back their rightful will against the trustee coup and of the fascist Turkish dictatorship. People in different parts of Kurdistan resisted the fascist coup for 2 days. Despite the intense siege by the police, the people of Van did not leave the streets. Many people were detained and subjected to police violence during the resistance. The mass consciousness in Baku Kurdistan took flesh and bones with a tremendous and victorious resistance in Van. This political urban resistance, which is the motor and flair of the new period of struggle, shows the direction revolutionary development is going. With regard to the West, the solidarity with the Van settled on, and the attitude of blocking the reckless trustee coup of the fascist palace regime again embody the direction and dynamics of the mass struggle, opening to revolutionary development. The people of Van won a victory against the fascist dictatorship coup. This resistance of the people resulted in success, and the Van municipality was returned to the Dem Party co-chairs. The resistance was deemed as victorious. The streets were heavily hit during the clashes, and people came together to clean up the destructions caused after the celebrations. Thousands gathered to celebrate the victory of Van. After the resistance was won, people started celebrating.
With the war in Palestine still ongoing, we have summarized developments in the past 2 months.
On the 13th of April, Iran carried out a drone attack following the Iranian embassy attack by Israel in Damascus. The drones and missiles were launched from Iran, Iraq, and Yemen, targeting an Israeli military base near the Syrian border, where the attack on the Iranian embassy was launched from. This marks the first time in the war that an aerial attack on Israel was launched directly from Iran's mainland. Prior to this drone and missile launch, the Iranian state carried out attacks through third-party states and forces, such as the Houthis in Yemen. A number of objects were shot down by air defense systems in Israel and Jordan, as well as with US, British, and French military aid. A number still hit their intended Israeli targets. According to reports, a child in Jordan lost its life in the attack. The following week, Iran reported 3 drones targeting the area around the Iranian city Isfahan. Iran reported that they successfully shot them down. Domestic and international air travel was halted as it was during the drone attack on Israel prior. Shortly after the airspace was declared clear, it resumed once again. Isfahan houses Iran's nuclear facility. According to Iranian regime representatives, this facility purely exists for domestic security purposes. Which force sent the drones to the Iranian city is not yet confirmed. Whilst US media outlets were quick to report 3 aerial weapons were sent by Israeli forces, neither the Iranian nor Israeli military have confirmed this. A G7 foreign ministers meeting was called together rapidly after the news of the drone sighting. It is clear that it is not in the interest of the US nor the rest of the NATO states for this war in the Middle East to escalate at this time. The US have clearly advised Netanyahu's government against a further attack on Iran, saying they would not gain US support if they did. Simultaneously, it is a fact that the Israeli state has only been able to carry out its many violent attacks on both Gaza and the West Bank and in the Red Sea and beyond because of this support of imperialist forces in Europe and the USA. While the aggression clearly lies with Israel, it is the Iranian state which is now more than ever positioning itself as a defender of the Palestinian people. Though attacks by political Islamist states such as Iran targeting Israel might be welcomed in defeating the Israeli state, the oppressed people of the Middle East, the Palestinian people, above all, cannot primarily rely on such a force. We must not forget the colonial violence Iran showed towards the Kurdish people in the past and in its recent history, executing prisoners and infringing people's, women's and workers' rights. The war here is not one of religions, but between oppressed peoples on one side and Zionism and imperialism on the other. The appropriation of the resistance by political Islamic regional powers shows clearly neither Iran nor Israel are going to be the saviors in this war on the Palestinian people. A war between Iran and Israel would not be in the interest of the Palestinians or any other oppressed people in the Middle East. Such a war would bring nothing but suffering to the workers and the oppressed people of the region. While these developments are happening, the people of Gaza are still experiencing a humanitarian crisis. Access to water, food and medical aid is still not guaranteed, with many civilians starving and suffering from injuries. The largest medical complex in Gaza, Al-Shifa Medical Complex, which treated thousands of patients, has been completely destroyed. It has been proven that Israeli defense forces have shot and killed defenseless patients and the doctors and nurses who refused to leave their patients' side. A large part of the population has been forced out of their homes following Israel's war on the Gaza Strip. They have moved to the south of Gaza. Refugee camps in Gaza's most southern city of Rafah house roughly 4 times as many people as they are able to. At this time, there are about 1.5 million people living in Rafah, a city which previously had the population of about 275,000. All the while, Israeli forces continue waging attacks and a ground invasion on Rafah, which is still an enormous threat to the people of Gaza. The question of invasion is much more one of when than if at this time. On top of this, receiving reports from the ground in Gaza is becoming increasingly more difficult. Israeli military forces have killed 97 journalists since the beginning of the war in October. The UN ceasefire agreement reached in early March has not been recognised and has been discarded by Israel. The UN Security Council has adopted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the immediate unconditional release of all hostages. The Israeli Defense Minister made a statement on the ceasefire resolution by the Security Council which demanded a ceasefire in Gaza. He said they have no right to stop the war while Israeli hostages are in Gaza. Additionally, the US National Security Communications Advisor said the UN Security Council's Gaza ceasefire resolution was unrealistic. He expressed full support for the Zionist regime.
Moving on now to news from the revolution in northeastern Syria, Rojava, the People's Solidarity Network, People's Bridge, has issued a new statement.
On the 21st of April, the press center of the HPG, People's Defense Forces, stated that the Turkish army had begun its invasion of Metina. The Turkish army began its attacks on the area in South Kurdistan on the 16th of April around the villages of Ase, Yekmale, Khirabe, Khanke and Shelase in Metina. Unlike previous attacks, however, the area was not immediately attacked as a whole, but rather the attacks were extended step by step. On the nights of the 17th, 18th and 19th of April, the attacks were extended to the resistance areas of Gide Chachel and Gide Orte. These were bombed with fighter jets and combat helicopters. In the night of the 19th of April, the invasion was also extended to the Dargile area. The occupation attacks are currently taking place in the areas of Gide Hekari, Gide Chachel, Gide Shehid Chektar, Gide Shehid Pilang, Gide Orte, Ase, Yekmale, Khirabe, Khanke, Shelase and Dargile. In addition to the ongoing battles, the area is constantly bombarded by fighter jets and combat helicopters from the air, and by rockets and howitzers from the ground. Metina is located in the immediate defense areas controlled by the Kurdish Liberation Movement, which have been repeatedly targeted by the Turkish state for years. It was only on the 5th of March that the fascist Turkish President Erdogan declared that the issue of Turkey's border with Iraq should be resolved by the summer, and that the 13-kilometer deep security zone on Turkey's border with Syria should also be implemented. The Turkish state had strengthened diplomatic relations with Iraq in preparation for the invasion of southern Kurdistan that has now begun. On the 14th of March, a Turkish delegation, including Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Defense Minister Yaşar Güler, and head of the Turkish Intelligence Service, MIT, Ibrahim Kalin, met with Iraqi officers in Baghdad. The following day, the PKK was declared a banned organization in Iraq by the Iraqi state without parliamentary approval on the 15th of March. Then, on Monday, the 22nd of April, the Turkish president also visited Iraq, reaching deals regarding military and economic cooperation. With the invasion of South Kurdistan, the Turkish state is pursuing the goal of crushing the Kurdish liberation movement within South Kurdistan. The media defense areas in particular are a strategic target for Turkey, as they represent an important retreat area for the Kurdish liberation movement. In addition, the Turkish state has suffered heavy losses here in recent months as a result of guerrilla actions and offensives. The current invasion can also be seen as a revenge on the guerrillas. But the strategic importance of the media defense areas also makes it necessary for the Turkish state to crush the guerrillas, because if this succeeds, the Turkish state can intensify its attacks on the self-administration in northern and eastern Syria. At the same time, the Turkish state not only has a military interest in completely occupying the media defense areas and crushing the Kurdish liberation movement there, but Turkey's economic interests also play an important role. Together with Iraq, Turkey is pursuing the goal of establishing a new trade route. The trade route is to connect the Persian Gulf with Turkey and run through northern and southern Kurdistan. It is of course a major problem for Turkey if the Kurdish liberation movement controls areas in southern Kurdistan. However, the rigging of the local elections and the attempted election coup in Van have also shown that Turkey sees any victories for the DEM party as a problem in North Kurdistan. In addition to the trade route, a new pipeline planned by Turkey is also to run through North and South Kurdistan. Due to the presence of guerrillas in South Kurdistan, these plans cannot be realized without problems. However, we must also see the current invasion as a response to the victories of the DEM party and the defeat of the AKP-MHP regime in the local elections in Turkey. Despite the rigging of the elections and attempt to appoint the AKP candidate as a mayor in Van, the uprising in Van, in addition to the victories in elections, made it possible to defend the election victory of the DEM party. The invasion is also intended to stabilize and secure the fascist AKP-MHP regime. The Kurds and the Kurdish liberation movement are to be portrayed as the enemy against which Turkey must jointly defend itself. However, the local elections have clearly shown that these attempts at division and distraction are slowly losing their effect. The Turkish state's invasion of the immediate defense areas aims to bring the whole of Kurdistan back under colonial occupation, with Turkey currently taking the leading role. For this reason, we must take to the streets all over the world against Turkey's attempts to occupy the liberated areas of Kurdistan, such as the media defense areas and Rojava. We must also oppose the support of NATO countries for the Turkish occupation attacks. It is states such as the USA, Germany and Great Britain that support Turkey diplomatically, militarily and economically, and thus give the green light for the attacks against Kurdistan. We call on all trade unions, workers, women, LGBTI+, youth and all progressive movements to unite and take to the streets against Turkey's occupation attacks against Kurdistan.
Thank you for watching Özgür News. This was our monthly program in English presenting news and commentary in the Middle East. My name is Amelie, and see you next time.